everybody, and welcome to another edition of There's a Will, your favorite and certainly longest regular talk show in Central Europe, in English, I might add, in English. There are many other longer and much harder to watch and more boring shows than this one. With that in mind, today's topic is a real cracker, folks, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
One we can all sink our teeth into. We have Tony McFarlane Gonzalez. If I don't mention the Scottish connection, he gets very upset. And so we have to mention that. And a man born in Aberdeenshire 20 short years ago. And in the studio, wincing, is Ivo Bender.
Wincing uncontrollably.
Wincing uncontrollably. Or maybe it's just a tick. Have that checked. Spotted fever is no good.
Not the lights, I don't know.
The lights bothering you?
Yeah, a bit.
They turned them up, didn't they? I don't know if it's going to help.
To make you look pretty.
Well, you think we look pretty? Tony looks good. Wherever he is, this is better light today. Or maybe you're just happy.
I'm much happier, yeah.
You're just happy, yeah, which is great. It's a good way to be, optimistic. You know, they asked the monk, they said, why are you so optimistic? And he said, well, it's just easier, isn't it? You know, just easier. Anyway, we also have my cousin in the studio. Not been proved yet. We're working on it. No. Debrett's is on the. And I said, but we don't need Debrett's. We just need a regular genealogist. But they said, no. With ears like those, we must.
Yeah, indeed.
And so there we are. Nicholas Richardson, Ivo Bender, Tony.
Montana.
And today, we're going to talk about a subject close to our hearts, mass shootings in America.
Yep.
It seems like every time there's a mass shooting comes up, I was on television on another station talking about this the other night, and so it struck me, one, that I knew a little bit about it because it's kind of an American thing. You grow up with it. England joined the party at Hungerford. So, congratulations. 1987.
Yeah.
The Hungerford Massacre. And we'll get to that in a second because I think it's a good place to depart from the beginning and then with the most famous European copycat of these mass shootings. And then we'll get into, perhaps we'll talk a little about the recent ones, which are, you know, even more baffling than usual, it seems. And what mass shootings are, what qualifies as one, and guns and the control of them. And Tony will be good on that because Tony had to learn all about guns, didn't you, sir? Yeah.
Yes, in order to be alive.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we have an expert on guns, and so let's just start off with the two recent shootings. There was one at Half Moon May, seven people killed, 1 wounded, 8 fatalities. If you can do 7 plus 1, I can just. And it was called Workplace Revenge. Then there was Monterey Park, 12 people killed. That was before it, going backwards in time. About 10 days before, Monterey Park, 12 people killed, 9 wounded, 21 casualties, and the suspect committed suicide. So those are the two latest. Now, what constitutes a mass shooting? Does anyone know? There's a rule.
I don't know.
I feel like we're in the class, you know.
Probably there's a number threshold.
There is a number.
Above 2.
Just what would a reasonable man or woman or person, for the ones who are not men or women, assume that
5?
5 is a good guess. Anybody else?
3.
3 is right. 3 or 4, depending on which of the organizations you look at, because the Washington Post says, I think 3. The Congressional into this says 4. Okay. So at any rate, it's 5 would have seemed reasonable sort of figure to me. Are gang shootings part of this? Criminal attacks? They're not, are they?
No.
They're categorized in a different way, right? Yeah. I think it's important to establish these parameters so we know what we're talking about, because it is confusing if, for example, criminals kill a bunch of people trying to rob a bank or some other thing, place, is that a mass shooting? And in fact, no, because it's for profit, right? So the mass shooting tends to be something that is done most often without motive, oddly enough. The top 10 mass shootings the top 10 if you look at numbers. Starting with Las Vegas, it's 60 people were killed. The fellow you remember that story?
In the hotel.
What do you
yeah.
remember from it, Nick?
Jab in the hotel,
Yeah.
shooting with a rifle at a car park down below, quite a long way from. I had quite a long range rifle.
Yeah.
Took the
He had
police quite a while to get to him.
Yes.
Yeah, because he barricaded himself in the room. He had multiple weapons in his room, one AR-15 and one long rifle. And he was tagging people with the AR-15, and then once he ran out of ammunition with the AR-15, he went to the long rifle and continued to hit people from there.
Yeah, indiscriminately into a crowd at a concert, right?
Yes.
Indiscriminately, no connection. So it's rather like, I mean, not to be glib, but it's rather like a serial killer in a hurry, fast forward serial killing. Let's get them all at once. I don't have the patience to plot this over months and years. In that Las Vegas case, of course, there was no notes, and nobody knows why he did it. No one has any clue, not even his family. Out of these top 10, and we'll look at history in a little while, 7 of them were without motive. Okay, and one of them was supposed to be far-right extremism. At least that was the person was saying. It was a 21-year-old, so couldn't have had very much of a long track record in politics. And then there were 2 done by self-styled Islamic terrorists. So, what is an active shooter? Anybody know?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Active shooters are people that are currently firing upon and cannot be responded by civilians that are locally around, and cannot be nobody returns fire until proper law enforcement's there. So it's a person that is just known to be shooting. An active shooter can be anybody that is a licensed shooter or a non-licensed shooter.
Again, defining the terms is really important. What's the situation before we get into some history, let's continue to establish, what's the situation for having a gun in Poland?
You have to have a license. In general, Europe is very, very strict. And there are various types of licenses that you can apply for. You can apply for a license to carry a gun for self-protection, which is very difficult to get, because you have to prove that you are in danger, right? So, I don't know, you have to say that, look, I own a jewelry store and I had threats from bandits that they want to rob my jewelry store, for instance, right? So you have to prove. Then you have a sporting license. So you can own a gun if you participate in shooting competitions. And shooting competitions that include also, regular handguns, for instance. Then you can have a hunting rifle license. And then the biggest loophole, as I understand, is the collector's license. So you can actually say, this is my hobby. I'm actually building a big collection of, historical weapons. In fact, a couple of years ago, I visited a gun shop outside of Warsaw, in which you could buy, World War II submachine guns of both sides of the war. So there is that possibility. But this general self defense is the one that I would say is the most obvious one. Is probably the most difficult to have, and because if you have a different one, like the collector's or the sporting license, you cannot carry it. Yeah, it has to be disassembled when you are not at a shooting range or not at your home. So yeah, it's difficult to get a gun in Poland. In fact, it's probably one of the more difficult countries to receive a gun permit in Europe.
Have you ever tried, or anyone in your family?
No, I have several friends who do have licenses. Yep.
Okay, we're going to come to you, Nick, in a bit. Let's go to Tony. Tony, have you anything to add about obtaining weapons here in Poland or in Europe, and how it's different?
Yeah, it's a lot different in the United States because they actually do have to do a psychological test, and they also have to go to medical examinations. And to caveat on Ivo's comments about weapons where they have to be stored, it's not a complete disassembly. They have to just make sure that the ammunition is completely separate, and the ammunition has to be outside of the magazines, so magazines have to be completely empty, and ammunition has to be stored separately from the magazines and away from the rifle. And if you have the weapons at home, you have to have a safe. And if you have them stored at a gun shop, that gun shop is responsible for your weapon without the magazines. And the magazines, you still have to have them at home empty without the rounds in them.
Okay, that's pretty thorough. Let's go back to, I was alluding to the Hungerford 1987 shooting. It's very similar. I think there were more casualties in that one, but it's very similar to the first mass shooting in America. Anybody want to guess? Anybody want to guess what you might call the first mass shooting? It was a criminal thing.
UT, Texas?
Before that, Al Capone.
Oh, okay.
St. Valentine's Day Massacre was when, because what did they do? In the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, if you look that up, there are plenty of documentaries. There's even a couple of films about it, or that's the main set piece of the film, is when Capone's people went in and shot Bugs Moran's, some of Bugs Moran's, who's the North Side guy. Capone's on the south side of Chicago and based around Cicero in that area. And then the other fella, Bugs Moran, was in the north side, and they lured him to a parking garage and just shot with machine guns 5 guys. So this was a big wake-up for law enforcement in the United States. It was the first time anybody had ever done such a thing. And using, a sort of firing squad using automatic weapons, I suppose. Although the Indians, Native Americans, might have something else to say about that. The first time that happened, the first massacre in the United States was in 1945. So it's the end of the war. A fella, very similar to Hungerford, walks down the street and kills a dozen people for no reason in a small town, okay? Then nothing happens until 1964 or 65.
It was 65.
Is it 65? When with not with Whitman in the tower, we come to that. That's what you're thinking of?
Yep.
The year before that, I think, or the same year earlier, there was a fella who took his father's rifle and he went out to the near the freeway and just started shooting people randomly in their cars. And a movie was made about that called Targets, based on the idea, by Peter Bogdanovich. So I think his first feature for Roger Corman. And so you can see that film, 1968, just a few years later. Then, of course, Tony, you want to talk about the Texas Tower shooting, which is the one, perhaps still the most famous one until Las Vegas. Yeah.
I wouldn't. Las Vegas was just the most recent one, but there was another famous one. Had motive, but that was more Columbine. That was because it was a school. But yeah, UT Texas is.
Well, Columbine was when the teenagers went into the school and killed. Yeah, there's been a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of case studies on that one. That's one of the reasons. But anyways, UT Texas, he went into the tower. Had complete and utter oversight because that tower is the watch. It's basically the all seen. It's kind of like Big Ben for the Texas campus, and he was just randomly targeting people. I don't remember the exact number of people that he killed. Do you remember the number?
Yeah, I've got it here somewhere. I can just find it.
He didn't have anybody that he wanted to target in specific. He just randomly picked people, just from the street. Didn't even care. Just targets of opportunity. That's the scary part because he had some psychological issues, and that's why I strongly believe that the United States needs to really change how people are actively getting their weapons and acquiring them, and they need to have regulations just like the European countries do, because psychological evaluations are key. There are some people that do not need to have weapons, flat out, and if they fail those tests, there's a reason that they failed those tests.
In the Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas campus, 17 people killed, 31 injured, so that's a big total. And that's, I guess, why it's still very famous. Also, the sort of point he took, he was an ex-Marine, like Oswald, so at the time, that must have been quite a connection. Do you remember hearing about this one, Ivo?
Oh, certainly, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's, well, I wasn't there, meaning in the world yet, but yeah, of course, it's
Well,
the most
suggesting
iconic one in a
it's a long time
sense, you know. It's it's and it's sort of a type,
Iconic or something,
iconic,
yeah.
a type, basically a guy in a tower shooting everyone, and being completely, immune from any police action for quite a while because exactly of his carefully selected vantage point. Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if the fellow in Las Vegas was thinking about that one. We won't know. Nicholas, so I set up this England, a green and pleasant land, right?
Yes.
And but has its own version of one of these mass killings. The first one, I believe, was Hungerford.
And there was a second one in Scotland, Dunblane, but those have been the only two.
Yeah, the only two.
And the restrictions on weapons in the UK now are very draconian in the sense that you can get shotguns, for which of course is a slightly different weapon for farmers and people who like to go shooting, but to get anything more advanced by a rifle, if your job requires it, if you're stalking the Highlands of Scotland or you're a vet or somebody, then you may be able to get a rifle. Similarly, a handgun, but otherwise handguns are impossible to get legally, more or less, even to the extent, I think, that British Olympic shooting teams have to go and train elsewhere because they're not allowed to keep their own weapons at home, even at that level. So really, only criminals can get hold of handguns in the UK. There is no legal method like there is in Poland to get hold of weapons. You know, shotguns, yes, for recreational shooting, and if you're a farmer and you want to control game on your farm, fine. Maybe then if you're a vet or a gamekeeper, then maybe a rifle for the purpose of shooting those animals for which you need a rifle, but otherwise that's it. So really, and that really became, even to the extent, as I said, if you're an Olympic athlete and you shoot, and that's your sport, it's almost impossible now to actually be able to keep your weapon at home under any circumstances.
Yeah.
And of course, our police are not routinely armed either, so there is a less of a gun culture than there is elsewhere. And that must make a difference, because criminals don't necessarily, although they do, unfortunately, since the increase in drug crime like everywhere else, have guns, but the starting point isn't that you have to have a gun to take on the battle with the police, because the police themselves, apart from specialised units, do not carry guns.
The Bobbies still don't carry guns.
They don't carry guns, no.
Lord, open season on Bobbies.
Well, but they don't. I mean,
Good thing the Mexicans aren't over there.
Yeah, well, there was no history.
drug
There was no real histoy of gun crime in the United Kingdom,
Colombians.
so they didn't need guns.
Yeah.
You know, the theory is that the policeman is a citizen in uniform, and that served us very well. Of course, in later years with immigration, international travel, and all sorts of things, then you get people from cultures where it's very different. I mean, the first time I think that the Metropolitan Police started having more armed units was when there was the massive immigration from the Caribbean, because in Jamaica at the time, criminals did routinely carry guns, and so for a while the British police found
They're
them.
called the Yardies? Or
Yeah, well, whoever they were. I mean,
there was a group
and
called the
before people
Yardies,
write it and complain this is some sort of racist comment. This is,
I lived in Brixton.
This is a historical fact.
Several years. I did
the police were responding to essentially foreign criminals who had foreign ways at that time. And now, of course, there are more weapons around. There are the diplomatic police, I think. They have guns. You see people at airports with machine guns and things, which always struck me as being a bit odd. What is a policeman going to do with a machine gun at an airport with all those hard surfaces? And then you have specifically trained units to deal with particular cases. But otherwise, the police are not armed. And I think occasionally, certainly at the height of the Troubles, certain government ministers, if they wanted, were trained in firearms use. I remember when Merlin Rees was Northern Ireland Secretary under the Labour government in the years before 1979. He had a gun, but that was to help him deal with a specific threat.
Well, this was terrorism.
That was
terrorism,
counter-terrorism, and then they had the police protect them as well. But so those are very rare examples. But it's certainly not the case in England. You can just, no matter how psychologically balanced you are, you simply cannot go out and acquire a high-powered rifle or indeed a handgun of any description.
I wanted to ask you, Ivo, you travel a lot in your capacity as a television director and producer and director to the United States. Do you feel safe when you go to Alabama, etc.?
Well,
you spend a lot of time in the United States.
Let's put it this way. I don't feel safe on the streets of New York City, where it's virtually impossible to get a license to carry a gun, because all the criminals, they don't really take this law very seriously, because they use guns as their work tools, the tools of their trade. So, and New York City has been ruled now by first in the past couple of years by a completely incompetent Mayor de Blasio. So it's a place where you literally don't feel safe, but you cannot have a gun. I also am quite often in Alabama, where everybody and his uncle is carrying, and frankly, I feel much safer on the streets of say Birmingham, Alabama, or Mobile, Alabama, than on the streets of New York City. So it's
where again, more people are likely to have guns.
Where probably every fifth person on the street is actually concealed carrying. Yep.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's subjective, but when I
you raise a good point. You know how many guns there are in the United States?
More than people.
Yeah, there's 103 or 4 guns. Tony might correct me on this. You probably know. Per 100 people. So there are more guns than
20, I think, per 100 people.
Okay, so it's higher, yeah? So Nick got it.
You can basically field an entire military with just the 180 million people that have weapons, and each one of them has more than 4 or 5 weapons each.
Yeah, that puts it in perspective. I think there's 393 million guns in civilian hands. Right? Yeah. 330 million people in the population, right? Isn't it? Around 330? Yeah. So many. Who counts them? So there's just a heck of a lot of guns. And a very small amount, the next 10 million, not even 10 million, I don't think, are in the hands of police and military. So you see the private accumulation of guns is vast, which is a good time to have a commercial break and sell you some soap powder or whatever they got. And we can come back and talk about the Second Amendment. Oh, my goodness. Put your boxing gloves on, because Nick is real liberal on this one. He's a lefty.
Hardly.
He's wearing pink leotards under that beautiful ensemble. Okay, so am I. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everybody, and I have Ivo Bender, Nicholas Richardson, no relation, unfortunately, and Anthony McFarlane Gonzalez in Gdynia, I think, or someplace like that, aren't you? Yeah.
Gdynia.
Thanks for joining us, by the way, Tony. Appreciate it. You know, last night when I spoke to you and was bribing you to appear on the show, the gifts are on the way. I said I was watching Moby Dick on the old movie by John Huston, and doesn't end well for Ahab. I just thought I'd say it doesn't end well.
Spoiler.
For that guy.
Spoiler.
Yeah.
We've not seen that film.
Yeah, I didn't know. I never heard the story before, and the end is not.
It's ruined it for me.
Yeah, it doesn't end well for the captain of the ship. Yeah. Okay, and I had the idea that maybe this white whale might be a metaphor, but I haven't figured out what it could be for yet. At any rate, Second Amendment. I think the Second Amendment will throw over. I can give a definition, but let's go to Tony. Let's get into the Second Amendment. What does it say, basically?
It's basically the right to bear arms. Now, the right to bear arms is a very touchy subject, and it's been interpreted in many different ways, sometimes for a negative and for positive. The whole intent for the Second Amendment was for the people to rise up a tyrannical government and be able to overthrow them in a peaceful manner, but to be able to use the force of weapons if they have to. That's written by the forefathers. However, some people have taken it to the extremes, and they don't know how to go about it correctly. So the Second Amendment's just
A
not only there
well-regulated
for-
militia, I believe, is included.
Yes.
I think that's a pretty important phrase, but go ahead. Yeah.
Fact, yeah. So the regulation means that they have to abide by certain laws and certain parameters and certain ROEs, or rules of engagement, for how they actually go about conducting their use of weapons inside the United States. Now, yes, it also has the right to bear arms to protect yourself, and we will touch into that because there's a very soft-bellied issue that people are talking about, and it's called the castle law, and that's gotten a lot of people into trouble.
A man's home is his castle. That was Lord Cook, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and in the United States, that extends to the property that you're driving or riding, not walking.
Okay. So an invasion, you get to defend yourself if there's an invasion. Ivo, you're chomping at the bit, are you?
No, I think it's actually a very reasonable law. I think that, of course, especially in the context of America, of a country that has just thrown off the shackles of the crown with arms, and was very much about this redefining our better, deeper understanding of personal freedom. There was a clause about guns in the Constitution. I think that makes perfect sense. Also, I think from the very sort of geographic point of view, if you live in, as many original Americans did in homesteads, and there are no telephones, you can't call the police, and even if you ever tried, even if you managed to call the police, they're probably 80 miles away in the nearest town. So it makes sense to defend your home, because there are always bad people out there, whether we like it or not. And no political system was ever capable of actually stopping bad people from doing bad things, or creating a new man, as communism tried, that would not be tempted to do horrible things. So I think it is our right to be able to defend ourselves. In Europe, we generally think that it's the police's job. Well, good luck when you have a gun pointed at you or someone is breaking into your house, especially if you don't live in a major city. So I think this castle law makes perfect sense. If someone breaks in the middle of the night into my house, I should be able to have a very brief discussion with that person.
When I lived in Nicaragua, I slept with a revolver under my pillow, with good reason, because it wasn't safe on the street, and a home invasion could have been unpleasant.
Don't ever keep your revolver under a pillow. It's too obvious for an invader. Keep it in such a way that he does not expect that thing to be
I kept it under my pillow, but my pillow was in a trunk in the closet.
Perfect.
Yes, safe.
Perfect.
Locked away safely. Well done.
Locked
Yes.
away with a lock and a chain around the thing. Of course, I'm not going to have a dangerous weapon around my head. That's ridiculous. I have enough trouble already. Okay, so what about, that's the original intention of the Second Amendment. Where have we gone wrong? Should people, I'm going to throw it out there, should people be able to have these sub-automatic machine gun type or repeating rifles or whatever you want to call them, assault weapons?
Well, they're not.
What do you think as a military man? What do you think, Tony?
What is an assault weapon? Anything that you can get your hands on, literally.
Brass knuckles to...
A kitchen stool.
Yes, a kitchen stool, a radio, the watches you're wearing can be used.
He froze.
Yeah, but it's hard. While we're getting him back, but it's hard to kill 20 people with a stool.
Exactly.
That's kind of
it's
my
quite
point.
obvious. It's quite obvious that these weapons, which are designed for military use,
Yeah.
should not be available to the average man or woman in the street just because they think they have the right under the American Constitution to bear arms. I mean, that is completely nonsensical.
Right, and certainly not kids.
Yeah, exactly. So you
We're getting
might
Tony back by
yeah,
now.
yeah. So you might, if you live in America, have a you know. I mean, it's not a place I would want to live or live under that sort of regime. But you may have a handgun for defence, and you may have a rifle for sporting purposes. But the idea that you need a weapon which is designed to be used by soldiers in war, it seems to me completely ridiculous, actually. And I can't think of any reason. Now, you can look at Finland and you can look at Switzerland, where people do have these weapons because it's part of their military service. And every person...
Should we make it part of military
and every
service?
person has to have one of these. They have to be trained to use it.
Right.
They have to do their fortnight
point.
a week in the army to defend the country. And they keep these weapons at home, locked at home. And as far as I'm aware, there have not been any recent mass killings in Switzerland or Sweden where there are lots of these dangerous weapons at home because they're at home and they're there for a purpose.
Ivo, jump on that.
Well, I think that we're jumping into a conclusion that is not actually correct, that it is the availability of guns that creates those incidents, right? So, in other words...
is it the availability?
No, it's not.
That's your question.
No, my question, my point is that it is not, because we have. Yeah. It's a cultural thing, and it has to. And it, in a country that restricts gun ownership completely among the civilian population, such as communist China, you had many incidents of, for instance, mass stabbings at kindergartens. Right. So if you have deranged individuals who want to kill a lot of people, they can do it. Of course, it would be easier for them with a machine gun. By the way, it is almost impossible to own a machine gun in the US legal. Let's not confuse it with an automatic weapon. Automatic weapon is the one that you pull the trigger and you get one shot, and you don't need to reload it. A machine gun is the thing that goes to make it very...
I can make that noise too.
Yeah, and I would argue that in that sense, that there is a similarity between China and the US, in that both countries went through, not exclusively, of course, but these countries both went through a long period of several decades of the devaluation of human life. So I would argue that when you trumpet abortion as a human right, or if you actually force, like in China, women to abort if they are about to give birth to a second baby, as was the policy of the Communist Party for a long time, you diminish the value of human life. And when you start with this, if human life is not human life, then, what's stopping me from taking it?
I would say that even accepting that as a point to be dealt with, a philosophical issue. One, Nietzsche said, just to paraphrase, he said, if God is dead, or when God is dead, anything is possible. That's to paraphrase Nietzsche. And that encapsulates the problem with
yes, it does.
Societal philosophy.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I would add, but that itself is part of a wider collapse, I think, in cultural values. And although the experts will say I'm wrong, there is no doubt about it. When you and I were children, we'd go and take toy guns and we'd play cowboys and Indians in the streets. Nowadays, young people sit at computers and they have very, very lifelike computer games, many of which are based on shooting people. Mm-hmm. A very popular game, I'm told, is Grand Theft Auto, a lot of car stealing and shooting. There are other sort of games based on military combat. And I'm sorry, you cannot say that this is not having an effect on people.
Yeah, I stole a car on
it's the fact
there's the
fact that there's no balance.
The point, yeah.
This is the point. The people are all about this sort of. They're living in this almost virtual world, and therefore they're not going out and playing. They're not climbing trees or doing other things which we did as children. They're not riding around bicycles without helmets and falling off with their scuffed knees and getting back on again. They're not involved in community activity, and it's all too immediate. And the idea that if you have a grievance, people will do all sorts of things. If there's a gun lying there, you might, in the heat of the moment, pick up the gun. Yeah. In a way you wouldn't have picked up the gun when we were children. Revenge is often and what is very sad in America, which you don't get anywhere else in the world as far as I'm aware, these poor little infants who take a gun out of mama's handbag in the shopping centre car park and accidentally shoot her. I mean, this is just craziness. Absolutely, absolute
a child
craziness.
in Newport News, 6-year-old, took a gun, a revolver, a pistol or something, to class and shot the teacher. Didn't kill the teacher, but shot the teacher. The worst thing is, because I was talking to my aunt. She was telling me the story, and she lives in Washington. But the worst part is that she had warned. The teacher had said, "Look, I hear there's a gun here. We got to investigate," and the administration did nothing.
Yeah.
Of the school. So this is part of the problem too. Is when you're identifying.
Well, part of the other problem, you
problem.
raise a good problem, that you cannot now criticise or discipline anybody for anything because it infringes some sort of right. But your right to life, your right not to be shot, doesn't count.
Right.
But you cannot question that student who's arriving at school with a suspiciously large rucksack.
This is not new. Yeah.
And this is the problem. It's this
not new.
complete distortion of values.
You remember the film Death Wish?
Yeah.
Death Wish. Charles Bronson?
Yeah.
Okay, they let the criminals put his daughter in a coma and kill his wife, and then later they get let out on bail or something like that.
There was a case in the United Kingdom where a farmer who'd
That's
been
the 70s.
repeatedly, his house had been repeatedly attacked at night by yobbos, and on one occasion he picked up his shotgun and shot 2 of them, and he was the one who actually was faced a major
in New Jersey,
charge.
there's a law, apparently,
yeah,
there's
but
a
of
law
course,
that if
unfortunately,
somebody comes into your...
got-
Well, let me just finish.
Yeah.
If somebody comes into your house, because it makes your point, if somebody comes into your house, if you can get out of your own house, your home is not your castle,
Yeah.
you have to get out.
Yeah, I mean, the problem of your home not
That's
being
a
your
New Jersey
castle,
law.
of course, is it's certainly the United Kingdom and other places,
this
no
is
doubt.
anti-property.
It's the government which is undermining your right. I mean, there was a time in the UK where nobody could get into your house without legal excuse. And the people who could get legal excuse would essentially have to be, court officers with a warrant. Now, almost anybody's allowed to invade your home because government has become too big as well, which is a slightly different issue.
Anybody came into my home without permission in the middle of the night, it was going to be very unpleasant for someone.
Well, exactly.
I can guarantee
But
you that.
unfortunately, the law of England is not that. The law of England is you are then, did you use reasonable force to resist these people who broke into your bedroom in the middle of the night, scaring you to death? I mean, it's a completely artificial.
What's reasonable?
Completely. But
The situation's irrational.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. And this is part of
Yeah.
the point we've lost, and it goes beyond this programme. Sorry. We've lost all concept now of common sense and rational response to things.
Well, not
Both
just in
from
this area,
government-
but across
yes,
a broad range of
rulemaking is all wrong.
Yeah.
Everything has become wrong, wrong, wrong.
Why, Ivo? Because we've lost Tony, so we'll just continue.
As Nicholas has said, and as you alluded to, because there is the nihilistic sort of pervasive mood in most of the elites of societies, right? Which was predicted by Nietzsche, because Nietzsche was not boasting about the death of God. In fact, he was lamenting.
No, he was lamenting
the
A lot of people read that the
perception.
wrong way.
Yeah, that's
You have to have
actually-
a framework of belief. That's what he's saying.
Exactly.
And when it is being rejected, and then something that at the same time claims to be scientific, but then tells you to be emotional, and that emotions are the only thing that should really rule your life, right? Listen to your heart. Well, your heart can be wrong sometimes, and when you mix it with
Hey, your heart can attack you.
that's also very true.
Don't forget that.
Exactly, very, very true. Yes, although I prefer the term cardiac arrest. It's kind of
Well, you prefer to be taken into custody.
Your heart is detained and just attacked.
Rather than a street fight, you want to be taken into custody.
but this dissolution of this order that has existed for millennia, in which literally millennia, 2 millennia actually, which said that human beings have a special exceptional place, that they are endowed with their particular dignity, and if you remove that, then there's nothing stopping
That's the whole
killing other people.
point of America. It was set up that way. The only problem is, what about slavery? Well, yes, of course, and that was something that was, they couldn't get the thing written if they said no slavery at that point. But Washington was anti-slavery, etc. Many people, Adams, of course, many people, Franklin, anti-slavery. That's the one thing that people always hit upon, but you have to look at the time and then realize that later the United States actually fought a war. One of the main wars are always about money, but one of the main things, top two, was also slavery.
And it fought a war with itself.
Close run issue, yeah, with itself, over that very subject. So I wanted to go on, I was reading an article in Psychology Today. I just throw this out for you because some of the points you've just hit on. One of these is this growing nihilism, was by the fellow who wrote the song, not the song, the article. The shootings are way up in the last few years, according to the FBI. Mass shooters are here's the thing, are these psychopathic people or not? Because the psychologists want to say, well, they're just misunderstood. Or they're not really unhinged, they are often very calculating. Yeah, but crazy people can be the most calculating people
Well,
about.
of course.
To me, the psychopathy, the nature of the person committing the act is if they do it intentionally, it's premeditated, and they don't mind inflicting pain on other people with malice aforethought, as it's called in the law, right?
Yes.
In the criminal law. I asked Nick, because he's a lawyer, to back me up on these things. He's a legal expert, too. A lot of experts on this show.
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
Yeah, we are. And then often, you said vengeful. They're often angry people. They're vengeful, and they're seeking retribution from either a group or institution. Going postal employees, famous one. Okay,
Yeah.
Another thing. They often attack in these places which are considered places to relax fun. A restaurant, a club, a concert. This is hunting. This is that instinct of hunting. I'm going to prey on these people when they least expect it. They're least likely to be armed, when they're relaxed, when they're diverted. Yeah, schools, children. I mean, this is the most, if that's not psychopathy, what can it be?
It can also be called evil, actually. You know?
Yes.
And this is also something that we forget, that evil exists, and the myth of the noble savage that has been force-fed to, again, the intellectual elites since the second half of the 18th century is just that. It's a myth. And it is actually the Christian anthropology based on the concept of the original sin that is much truer. In other words, we are not noble savages. We have, as a species, a couple of really terrible tendencies, and they need to be kept in check through, and it had again been the way in the past 2 millennia, through a system that is very, very much based on the tenets of the Ten Commandments. Simple as that. And when we reject that, party on.
Yeah, well, exactly. But no, it's a good point. I just want to go through touch on Nicholas's point and go through what the sort of usual scapegoats are. See if we can't narrow down what we think the real reason is. Nicholas made the point about the games, and people are shooting and killing in those games, and it becomes sort of a practice. Could be for a person who's having ideas of killing other people, or
but it's not just that, it creates a climate.
Suicide.
But it creates a climate in the minds of these folk where extreme violence is normal. That's
Right.
the point. It's not that I play my computer game, I go out and procure a gun and kill people in the local primary school. It's that I play this game, I watch the films coming out of Hollywood, and I'm surrounded by an atmosphere of violence. So it doesn't appear abnormal when somebody goes to a school and shoots children, because it's kind of the reality of what I've seen in Hollywood and what I've seen on my computer game.
I'm not sure that I think there's a distinction between actively doing something, physically aiming, shooting,
Well, there is.
and going to a movie where you suspect.
Yeah, I know,
in
but
Elizabethan times, they had blood all over them from the pigs' bladders that they would collapse when they got stabbed, supposedly.
Well, yes, but that was...
And it went all over the front rows. You know,
Well, of course
whatever.
it did, but that was slightly, that wasn't as pervasive, I don't
But you're
think.
I think in drama, you're in on it. There's catharsis. There isn't catharsis in games.
And there is no catharsis in modern film usually, because we are at least over the past 10, 15 years or so, everything is to be ambivalent. So,
Well, sometimes a serial killer wins.
The gangsters are actually, very complex people who have,
Well, in Dexter, they win.
For
He
instance,
wins.
well,
The serial killer,
right?
right? That makes your point.
So there's, but I think in a sense, the games and this culture of violence are very, very, visceral and also visually realistic violence in games and movies. It's both, in a sense, a symptom of the disease, but it also creates it or amplifies it.
I think that's the case. I think that these are
exactly.
symptoms of the problem with belief in society, and it goes back. There's been a steady disintegration since the great Nietzsche saw it coming.
Well, since the French
And
Revolution.
it drove him mad, actually, knowing these things.
Well, it would do.
And seeing the way society was progressing, or not progressing. And then World War I happened. Now, if you're in World War I and machine gun, you're behind with a machine gun, and you have a license to kill all of these people, I mean, James Bond had a license to kill. No, the guys with machine guns in World War I, aiming at the troops, advancing on them, had a license to kill, and World War II. So, how can we have violence on the level of World War I, World War II, and all the horrors of World War II, and you become used to that? And how does that not damage psychologically the system?
But I think in
because
conflicts,
it's condoned by
particularly,
the people who run
particularly
things.
modern conflicts, post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of military folk do not recover from these terrible experiences. And there's a very good film which is currently available on Netflix, All Quiet on the Western Front, with German film, but remarkably, as
a very good film.
As an anti-war film, it's very moving.
Well, you've seen the original from 1930.
I haven't seen the original. This was the modern one.
Yeah,
but
the
it's still
original's great.
Yeah, but it's still a very good film, and I'm sure that
The book, of course.
it's a bit different in warfare because, in a sense, you're not engaging in violence for the sake of violence. You're engaging in violence to defend your country or defend whatever it is you're fighting for, which is slightly different. And you're also with lots of people. It's a very organised.
You're missing my point.
Organised
You're missing my
probably.
point. My point is, society is condoning its own self-suicide, or murder, and these are the leaders.
Well, yeah, but society is in the warfare. Society is actually struggling.
World War I is a very special case
defend
in
itself.
history. Yeah.
World War I actually did cause a tremendous trauma on especially Western European societies because precisely it was
we still see it here today.
And yes, it can be felt till today, reverberating through. And yes, it did contribute greatly to the devaluation of human life. Right? If millions are dying on the fields of Verdun, then maybe life is not precious.
There you go. But there was
a reaction to that after the war, because of course that's why you had the appeasement motion.
We'll do part two.
After the Second World War, because people did react to it.
Absolutely, and the Roaring *20s was all about let's have some fun, let's dance.
Exactly.
Smoke. Who cares?
A celebration of life as a reaction to the horror, an unprecedented horror of World War I.
We got to finish.
Okay.
We just got our trousers unbuckled.
You have this obsession with trousers. It's very worrying.
We'll pull them up. Pull your socks up too. Thank you everybody for watching. See you next time.